Okay.
Well, I can just
Yeah.
start.
Okay.
We're back again. Actually, I was here this summer, a couple months ago, where we talked a little bit about where we're trying to go with streamlining the program and reducing some of the costs and whatnot as they've steadily ramped up. And there were quite a few questions, and then I know more questions were submitted. Catherine was unable to be there for that meeting, and so we're back again now to try to answer the questions, especially the ones that were outstanding from that previous meeting.
Okay. So, and for those that don't know me, I'm Catherine Brotherton. I'm the Deputy City Attorney. And just by way of a little bit of information about me, I've been in-house at the city for 3 or 4 years. And before that, I was a harangue along with the rest of the crew.
Sorry,
All right.
you may hear it all. It hadn't popped up on my screen.
Oh, good thing.
Well, I was in the middle of a project review.
Thanks for coming.
Sorry.
So I was in Harangue for 10 years prior to that, and so I've been working with the Toxics Board for a long time and worked with Jerry Lids, did the litigation that was a part of that, and I've worked closely and had the pleasure of working with Jerry Lids and Glenn Klein for a long time. They were all very involved in that. So that's just by way of a little history of me. So some of the questions that came up, there's the legal component to it, and then there's the policy component, which is why we thought it was important that the two of us are at a meeting together. And the initial jumping off point of why there was some questions of why are we having these discussions, why that were in some of the questions that came through. And I think that it's important to kind of understand the genesis of the discussion about staff support and where it originated from where I saw it. And Chief Bruce, jump on in. It was I think 2 years ago, or not this last fee adoption, but the one prior to that, where council raised a number of very specific questions about why the fee was continuing to increase every year. And the year before last, the increase was fairly substantial per FTE, because at that point, the law had all been settled for a number of years. We were working within the same rubric, but the fee continued to go up. And council asked some very specific questions of city staff and the city manager about why, and expressed concern about ever having a fee that high ever again. And what could we do to make sure that didn't happen? And there were some very, very specific questions around that. And that was the starting point of really all of these discussions now, was that council discussion and the adoption of that fee. And I didn't go back and look at the minutes. I did happen to be attending that meeting, and there was a discussion of we don't want to have to adopt another fee that looks like this again, that's this high and it's continuing to go up. So here we are now. The fee a year ago, because of folks added to the program, the discussion was a little different, but that the discussion about making sure we are reducing how we can look at this fee and how we make sure they're not being asked to adopt something like that before, that is what led to these discussions. So from that, there were some very specific questions asked of me, and you have 2 different things from me that addressed those. The first one being, what are the minimum requirements of the charter? And you have that legal memo from me about that. Like, what does the charter mandate that we do? And it is just that. It is the minimum under the charter. Is it the highest functioning program? No. Is it necessarily how you as a board would want to see the program operating? No. And the memo wasn't intended to address that. It was simply of, what do we need to do to make sure we are legally compliant with the charter? And that is what we believe the charter requires us to do. There was a couple follow-up questions to that. One regarding, is there a legal requirement under the charter that we maintain, that the staff maintain a master list of all the reportable chemicals? We believe no. There's no requirement in the charter or the code that that city staff maintain a master list. Does it make it easier? Sure, absolutely. But that's the policy side of it. Do we want to do that? Do we have to do that? No, we don't believe so. And a lot of that's what this comes down to. Do we have to? No, in many cases. Do we want to? Different discussion. The same thing with going out to investigate, to have adding more folks to the program. Where does staff's involvement come to that? If the fire marshal's office has provided evidence, reasonable, substantiated evidence that there's folks not reporting, now the charter kicks in and it mandates that we go out, that the fire marshal's office go out and investigate to determine that. Is there in a charter an affirmative obligation to go out and beat the bushes to find folks? No. Is there a benefit to the program for doing that? Yes. And that's the policy discussion on whether we, as a body, want to be doing that, and whether the staff support and the funding is for that. So that's why there's the disconnect, and between these kind of minimum legal requirements versus the overall policy goals. Are there specific questions that, I did go through, and I don't know, I couldn't tell who was asking what, so I don't know if these folks are here. There was some specific questions, and the .85 work plan was provided to me, and as being what the board felt was kind of the minimum that they wanted staff to do. You know, and some of it is a minimum and is mandatory under the charter. Some of it's not. And I don't know if it's worth our time to go through all this and have me say whether we believe it is or isn't charter mandated, because really we covered that in the chart, in the memorandum of what is mandatory under the charter that we make sure we're doing so we're compliant. And again, some of these tasks certainly make the program more efficient and user-friendly. But unfortunately, again, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's mandated by the charter.
Could you talk about the city code? So I was the one who submitted the questions about the city code.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I read that section of the city code as requiring, so the city manager shall request advice from the toxic sport as to whether the new chemical should be added to the list of substances required to be reported.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't read that as requiring a list of substances. Did you?
There is absolutely a list of substances.
Okay.
The charter sets it out. And the charter sets out what the lists are, and they specifically reference those lists. And so the question is, but the lists, if we did nothing to the list, the reportable chemicals that folks have to report on would be the ones that existed at the moment that charter amendment was adopted. So we had to have some ability to have flexibility to that. So those lists exist. Having and the charter even speaks about adding to those lists, because we knew it would become a stagnant moment in time when the charter amendment was adopted. And so there isn't the list that's getting added to is the list that's set out in the charter. What I've always understood the list to be that we're talking about is this creation and maintenance of this giant master list that takes all those cross-reference lists in here and kind of gels them into one physical database, essentially. There is no requirement to have that gelled one single thing. What this does is it creates it's the addition to the lists that are cross-referenced in the charter. But the creation of that giant master gel list doesn't exist anywhere. It becomes a user-friendly issue when folks are reporting, but there's no requirement for it.
Can I speak? Oh, I just was following up on that
Yeah,
piece.
go ahead, I'll follow up after you tell.
Okay, maybe could you speak a little bit to how we bring new chemicals back to the council, they adopt, and or is that the city manager, where they get put on that list as new things come into play? Because I know we do that periodically.
Absolutely, and that is done, the administrative rule, and it's actually, it's a strange fine hair about what can be added, how things can be added, but how things can be taken away. Things are added, if a chemical is added to one of the lists that wasn't added before, then it is done, it's brought to the city manager as a proposed administrative rule adoption. And we actually have a list that's adopted by an administrative rule, and we have and maintain that list that's been added since the adoption of the charter. And so that can be done by the city manager through the administrative rulemaking process. If we wanted to remove one, because it's deleted from one of the lists that's adopted and cross-referenced, that actually is an action that can only be done by council.
Except that we have on the pending table
Mhm.
to go to council to change that.
Yes, that is, it's one of the ways to just kind of streamline and clean it up, is to delegate that same authority to have it done through administrative rulemaking to delete them and subtract them.
So we can add through the manager, we delete through the council as of today.
Yes.
I was just wondering, when you're trying to separate out charter requirements versus what you're calling policy, let's look at it from the point of view of those who are mandated to report. I'm not sure I understand your differentiation between a list and a master list, but if I am hired by a company to fill out the form of possible chemicals and all chemicals that should be reported, how would I know what those chemicals are unless I'm supplied a master list by the toxics board, the staff, and the fire marshal's office?
Well, the list is set, the lists are set out in charter. You go to the list.
But if we can't, that's a master list then.
That is, well, that's exactly right. I mean, this list right here, but for the reporting companies, the charter says, here's what you have to provide in a list of the sections of the Clean Air Act. So they would go, and they go to that list. But there's a giant overarching master list that takes all of these and synthesizes them down into one document. There's absolutely no charter requirement for that.
But how can you create the online form without a checklist of chemicals that the companies would then report? And I want to set a parallel. I was an 8-year member of the Lane County Planning Commission. There was staff in the Lane County Planning Department to assist those who needed to file forms or to report this and that, to fill out the forms. How is it different that we expect these companies that are required and mandated to report to find their own path to do so, to fill out forms without a form existing?
Well, and there absolutely has to be a form, but a form doesn't, there's no, and I'm not speaking to whether we're making it makes it easier or harder for them. You're very right, it would be harder for them. But are we legally mandated by the charter to have a form with a drop down where they can select a chemical? And the answer that we came to was no. It makes it considerably more difficult for them, but that doesn't mean it's mandated by the charter. And the same thing for, and like I said in my response to that, there are some things that were listed in the charter that the courts have said you can't require them to report on.
Correct.
At the very least, if we're not going to be providing that drop-down list or that master list, we would need to be informing these companies, you can't just go to the charter. These ones you do not have to report on. We would need to be affirmatively telling them that. At the very least, in my opinion, we need to let them know that these chemicals have been carved out. This list within the charter, actually, the courts have rendered part of it not reportable, that they don't have to report it.
Well, I would say on the, on the other side of that, what is not reportable, that means there are things that are reportable. And if we're informing them about what is not reportable, it's certainly our obligation to inform what is reportable, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
As
And the list
mandated by
is,
the charter.
and we are informing them of what's reportable when we refer them to the lists that are set out in the charter. Just like when we say what is not reportable, we're not gonna, it wouldn't be listing out what's not reportable, it would just be referring to the list that's in the charter. And again, I'm not saying that this would make it easy for them, but it's not, we don't believe it's legally mandated by the charter to maintain this dropdown.
The charter does require that the forms be in an easily understood format for the reporting entity, which I think what I'm hearing is that we don't believe it could have an easily understood format for the reporting form unless there's a list.
Well, an easily understood form is not the same as providing a drop-down list of things they can select on. Understood is, does it make sense? Can you fill out the form?
No. You propose to cut this list that would make it easier. So as far as making it harder without the list, do you have any idea like how much time might be involved among the people? And I'm wondering, does that time, that extra hard work in the absence of this service, is that smaller than the savings of city staff time that it would take?
I have no idea. And the question of, there's been no legal direction to not maintain this list. I want to make that clear. The question that was asked of my office was, are we legally required by the charter to maintain a master list? To which we concluded, no. Should you is an entirely different question and not a legal one.
Well, I would say the should is we want to make it as easy and inexpensive as possible for people to comply with, since it's 100% funded by fees that they pay. So we wouldn't want them paying fees that weren't manifested in making it easier to comply. You know, that's what I'm wondering is how much are we saving in the staff time versus how much are we costing the companies that have to report by not providing that.
And I think another question to me, what a natural question would be is, how much time does it take if we've got a master list right now, correct? If we did nothing more, we still have a master list that exists and is available. I don't know if it doesn't save staff time, correct me if I'm wrong, to pull it down. Right? It exists right now, it's there. So I was asked the kind of insular question of, are we legally mandated to maintain a master list? We conclude no. But it begets a couple of questions is, are we considering pulling it down? Or are we just considering not updating it? And those are all different questions.
Catherine's here to answer the legal part of the equation here. So those were part of the questions that I received when I was here last time.
And I can ask one question?
Yeah.
So, and I'm the newest member here, I think. So, I have not gone through any of these meetings with the council, but I was wondering, so it does list out here, where the list of chemicals need to come from. But it says for each of these that we can remove some of the chemicals, so that it's not just a list that they can access through, the extremely hazardous substance, what this is listed as. So that's what I'm wondering, how is industry supposed to know if we remove substances? I mean, are you saying now that we need to make a list of things that aren't supposed to be? I mean, somehow we have to have a list, like there needs to be a list of things that we have to have recorded, and then a list that we don't want recorded. So I don't understand how do we deal with that part?
Any changes, what we concluded was, any changes that we made to the list, additions, subtractions, any changes to this from the time it was adopted when the charter amendment went into effect, we are absolutely obligated to have that list.
Okay.
We are, and I mentioned I mentioned the additions, not the subtractions. But to the extent there, we made additions to the list that existed at the time, we absolutely would be obligated to keep that. Same subtractions as well.
Yeah, we need to do that, but how do we get that information to industry?
We have the tracking instructions are adopted. There's also and I've never had to go into reports, so I don't know how it works. But I mean, that would be communicated to them when we send out invoices, we send out the tracking instructions.
Maybe Joe could just give a quick synopsis of how that works.
Yeah, because this is Amber and Andre's first round.
Yeah.
No.
They already joined a few months ago. so
Sorry about that.
They don't know this part. Oh, no, that's okay. So every year, I send, at the beginning of the year, I send out all of the reporting and non-reporting businesses a number of notifications. And for the reporting businesses, I inform them if there's been an update to the hazardous substance tracking instructions for any of the anything on the list of reportable chemicals. So that's how we let them know. And I do a scan. I had it on my list to do 4 times a year, but it's turned out to be more like twice a year. I scan all of the federal lists and the Code of Federal Regulations that's listed there in the charter at least twice a year. And then if I notice there's been any chemicals that are on those lists or not on those lists, that are on our list or not on our list, I bring those changes to the Toxics Board, and then we decide what we want to do with them, which is usually make the same changes so it can be consistent. And then I take the Toxics Board recommendation either to, as the process is now, either the city manager for administrative rule update or to the city council to remove the ordinance.
And so a piece of that is, that's the way this functions, is the city staff does the review. Then the affirmative review, that twice yearly affirmative review, is the piece that's not required by the charter. What the charter says, the Toxics Board may recommend. There's pieces in here that says the fire marshal's office shall. So the charter is clear when the fire marshal's office has an affirmative obligation to do something. There isn't anything in here that says the fire marshal's office shall review the federal list to make recommendations to the Toxics Board for additions or subtractions. It doesn't say that. It just says the Toxics Board may recommend. So where that obligation falls is not mandated by the charter to do the affirmative review. Again, does it make sense to do it this way? What kind of finances, how much time are we talking about? All parts of a different discussion. But the current approach of having Joe go through, affirmatively review, come up with the chemicals, bring them back to you, not mandated by the charter.
And there's not like lots and lots and lots of changes to those lists all the time.
We've only actually adopted, I think, 2 administrative rule amendments, 3 administrative rule. They're not fluid lists. They're not changing a lot. That's why when we've got the list in, it's loaded into the form, I presume.
And it's now also loaded into the online data reporting system.
So the discussion about, having the businesses have to be like going through, trying to figure it out, I think that's kind of it's an abstract discussion that actually we're not going to that. That's not what a proposal would be.
It's abstract, but I mean, still getting to the root of the question.
Right.
That's what she's trying to do, is just answer the legal piece. I mean, it doesn't make sense now that we find we don't have to do it to go in and pull it.
Right.
Because it's already created. But again, it's just trying to answer
Right.
the question as it was posed.
So are you saying that if new chemicals come onto the Clean Air Act list, we are not supposed to add them to the website?
Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the charter doesn't mandate that the fire marshal's office go through those lists a couple times a year to see if theirs has been chemicals added.
Then how would you?
Well, right, what the charter says is it's the toxics board's obligation. So, and there's places in the charter that say the fire marshal's office shall. And when it comes to adding chemicals, the charter specifically addresses the toxics board making a recommendation. And it says the toxics board may make a recommendation. It's permissive, and it's the toxics board. So and there are some shalls that come in later. So what the code says is, if there is a chemical that's added, then the city manager, and really what we mean is fire marshal's office staff, when it says city manager, because they're the ones with the base of knowledge, including you all working on this. Now you've got some shalls that kick in, and you've got 60 days to do certain things, and you're going to consider an administrative rule, and you're going to report back of why it's not added. But that initial discovery of it doesn't fall to the feet of the fire marshal's office. Does it make sense to continue doing it that way? Again, totally separate question. But that's not what the charter requires.
Just out of curiosity, do you know when those administrative rules were, that added new chemicals to the list?
We did one recently, maybe a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I wanna say 2 to 3 years ago.
Right.
Contemporary time, definitely.
There was one in 2000.
Yeah, and, cause I remember I spent about 9 months within my first 2 years doing a bunch of research to put a bunch of changes through updates on the chemical list, cause it had not been looked at in
That's
about
what I-
years. And I have copies of those, and I can send them.
I'm remembering that process, I was just wondering, I mean, did we not make administrative rule updates because we weren't looking, or because
Oh, no,
there were a
well,
lot of changes?
yeah, no, since I've been here, we've been doing it, and we've been,
Right, but my understanding is it wasn't being done particularly regularly before, because we did a lot of cleanup updates.
correct,
Mhm.
correct, and that is why we need to spend a bunch of time to do the cleanup.
Were there other specific questions?
You know what? I might have missed, so I apologize. I think this program of identified items to, not required by the charter, is connected to a financial goal to reduce the staffing level. Is that right?
Well, yeah, it's in part, starts with the council questioning how the position, the FTE, kept
Yeah.
increasing, and then also the cost per FTE in industry, in part of which we
Yeah.
had people leaving the program and nobody was coming into the program.
Yeah.
So that was part of the driver for that.
So.
But that's the genesis of this.
Okay, so is this, where does it fit into the overall city budget goals and so on? Is this a separate, order or, direction to look at how to contain the staffing costs, or is it, where will, is it all, does it stand alone?
We did discuss this in the beginning of the
Okay.
meeting, but what it is the question was actually raised by council as they saw, not the last budget that was adopted for the toxics program, but the prior one, where we had the highest level of FTE the program has had, and we probably had the fewest participants, which drove the cost per FTE up, which prompted the council to start at, and Catherine was actually at that meeting, I wasn't.
Why do you think that is? The amount of participants are going down.
Well, people are leaving, moving out of the area, or they're changing their practices. There's probably been fewer moving in, but there's been some businesses that have added practices, that have added chemicals that weren't added into the program. And again, we're trying to administer what was set in motion by the voting public.
I guess what I just want to be sure of is that this is stands alone for the reasons connected to the toxics, the charter amendment is not lumped in with anything having to do with city budget reductions.
Well, this is
shortfalls.
outside money, so it's not part of the general fund. It has
Yeah.
its own budget that's derived by its own revenue stream.
Uh-huh.
I would say, as I said, the last meeting I was at, there is a concerted effort across the city to reduce
Yeah.
our cost footprint, which we've tried to become more economical. And if you recall, at the last meeting, I talked about the merger with the fire
Yeah.
departments and the things that we have done to try to reduce cost and be more responsive to the public. At the same time, what prompted this specific piece was the budget before the last one, and we're
Yeah.
still trying to get our arms around that.
So you're saying that it does, like you say, outside money, it should stand aside, it has its own funding source, and the merits of whether, how much the fees are and the costs are independent of whatever is happening with the general fund.
That's
And
correct.
it really would be prejudicial to, bring them in the same discussion, that everybody's got to cut, you got to do your part, and so on. What we decide to do with this is based on the needs of the program, the businesses, the public, everything.
Yes, sir,
Has
this is
nothing
this is not part of a proportional cut
Yeah,
to reach a general fund reduction.
and it's not coming up in that, to the council, being discussed in that it will be brought up in a way that they understand it's
Completely separate from that, it's not been part of the budget, annual budget process that we
Okay.
discuss.
that's what I,
It was brought to the council, as we do every year, proposed budget. It did raise some flags because we kind of got popped up on the radar, if you will, in
Yeah.
two areas.
yeah, well, I noticed the increase in fees and said we should be prepared to, keep everything as low as possible.
Sure. And then also what I discussed at the last meeting, part of my responsibility is trying to be as efficient as we can be, regardless of where the money comes from. It's
Yeah.
coming from the public. And
Yeah.
that's something that I think we always need to be cognizant of in how we run things. At the same time, we do need to be able to run the program.
Yeah.
One of the questions someone brought up was equity amongst city commissions and boards. And I was looking here at the Civilian Review Board from the Police Commission and the Police Auditor. And I'm struck by the parallels between the two, theirs and ours, both are in charter. And it says, second duty, powers and duties of the Civilian Review Board is the Civilian Review Board may review the completed investigations and adjudications of complaints, blah, 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 blah. So they may, so you would say that's not mandated, there would be no staff support for that. However, 2A says, or 2B says, all materials concerning completed investigations shall be provided to members of the commission to review. So even though the first one is a may, in order to do their job, they need staff to provide the materials. They're not expected to show up and start Xeroxing themselves, right? Or pawing through file cabinets. So can you explain the difference? Would you advise the police commission also to reduce their staffing and that the commissioner members provide their own documentation and research in order to carry out the may in statute 2?
Well, I want to be clear, I'm not advising we reduce our staffing. That's never been any legal advice to
That's
reduce
the policy
the
side.
staffing. The question is, and I'm not, the charter amendment for the Civilian Review Board, I am not gonna get into that here, because there's also a bunch of code that implements that. If that is something that we take a look at, I'm happy to do that, but I'm not gonna do it on the fly. because
I'm just struck by the
I-
may
and I-
and shall.
and the mays and the shall, and it matters. And so, and when I answered your questions, and when I answered the questions that came up, I read this very, very carefully, because the mays and the shalls mattered. When the question posed is, do we have to? Because a may and a shall makes all the difference when it comes to answering that question. And so, how I would answer that question, I would look at the entire context of that charter amendment for the Civilian Review Board, and I'd look at how all the mays and shalls work, and I advise based on that. But mays and shalls matter. But again, what makes sense for how this runs overall, and whether it's mandated by the charter, while the answer may be different, the end result may be the same, right? So if, even though you're not mandated to create a master list, if everybody agrees it makes no sense not to do that, then whether or not it's mandated by the charter becomes irrelevant. Our legal position is it's not. Does that matter if no one's considering not maintaining that list? Not really. Not really. So that's why I want to make sure, I mean, everybody's interests are generally the same. Having an efficient program that accomplishes the goals of this and gets the information out in a publicly available way, doesn't throw up a bunch of unnecessary obstacles to the folks that need to comply with this in the reporting. And how we get there may or may not be how it's mandated by the charter. So that's why some of the discussions of, is my legal opinion going to change of whether this mandates the creation of a master list? It's not. It's not. We don't believe it is. Does that mean that I'm taking the position we shouldn't maintain a master list? No. It doesn't mean that either.
So if the court was looking at this and somebody says, you know, you're doing stuff that's not explicitly spelled out in the charter. But I say, but it makes yes, you're right, we improvised this, but it saved us a bunch of money, and it didn't affect the participants, the stakeholders, except that it lowered costs. Would courts say, you're entitled to go ahead and save money if it's not explicitly outlined what to do in that case? If it was an obvious efficiency, would they say that you have that prerogative to do something that made it easier? Let's just say internal, or would they say, no, you have to go by the strict letter even if it's more costly?
Well, it's an interesting question, because the initial question I would be asked is, what's being challenged? What's the court reviewing it for? Did we do more than was mandated by the charter? What's the challenge? What's the court having to decide? Because I will tell you, we will never fall below the minimum requirements. That won't happen. I won't let it happen. It's not gonna happen. Can we do more? Absolutely. You absolutely can do more. I don't think you're gonna find a court that says you can't do more. Actually, that's not true. We've had a court say you can't do it based on, we've already had the court weigh in and say what we can't do under this program. We can't require certain pesticides. We can't base our fees on the chemical load. We know, the court has looked at this. They've told us what we can and cannot do. All of our advice is based on that. But now, when we're talking about the functionality of the program under those court decisions, can we do more? Can you have staff doing more? Can you have staff go out and beat the bushes to find more companies legally? Absolutely you can. Does it end up lowering the per FTE by adding all those companies to the program? Yeah, it did. It actually had a great result. It lowered the cost for everybody.
So the court would approve of that, even though it's not explicitly stated in the charter that somebody is to be assigned to go out and check around and see if anybody's not complying with the legal requirements?
Well, I can't say whether the court would approve of it or not, because I don't know what the question is that's presented to the court. The court doesn't issue random opinions on stuff. What is being challenged?
The question is asked here.
Right, but it's just I have no idea what the court would say on something like that.
Question, sorry.
Oh, so maybe this is a court question, so there's kind of like a citizen pursuit provision in the charter that says if we are not, if somebody is not in compliance with the charter, they can file a complaint with the board, is that, and then if we don't take action within a certain number of days, they can submit to the court?
Yeah, but that's talking about compliance with the charter.
Right, so say we haven't put any system in place for finding new companies that should be reporting, and there's company ABC out there and they should be filing reports, and we don't have any system in place. And so, the Toxic Board shall report to fire marshal hazardous substance users in non-compliance. So they're not in compliance because they're not reporting, and they're supposed to be their hazardous substance user, but we haven't done anything to identify them. That make makes me feel as a board member very uncomfortable that we haven't had it. I mean, there hasn't been a system in place until Joe started, right, to identify new businesses.
There was a system in place, I wouldn't say it was an efficient or very effective system.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, there were some added before.
did they like self-identify, or were they?
No, there was some.
I don't know exactly the mechanism
Right.
that was used at the time. There was an analyst that was over the program, just as Joe is now. Joe is a very detailed person, and whatever you put her
I know she's.
responsible for, she's going to do a very good job.
I'm not, I very clearly sense I'm not answering your question, but I can honestly tell you, I don't
Well,
clearly understand.
it's
what
hard,
your question is.
well, okay, I say it's an enforcement type of activity that's not explicitly spelled out. And if somebody challenges it, say, you know, you're going beyond what was said in the charter here. Could the response be, look, we're not intrusive, we're not hurting anybody, except that we do find people who should be paying into it. So it's worth the time, it makes the program work better without harming anybody. Can't we do something that isn't explicitly spelled out? Versus saying, well, we thought it would be a good idea, we didn't find anybody new, yeah, it cost us some extra money, but our judgment was we should do that. That would be the other case, is like, yeah, we just wanted to do this thing that cost money and it wasn't explicitly authorized. But if you can show that it made the program function better and didn't really cause any harm, you know, you weren't harassing people to find out, you know, but you did find people, that it was, you know, a payback for the effort, and along with the spirit, when the court say, yeah, that's implied in the, you know, that they'll do what's needed to make the thing work.
Well, whether it's even, you know, the legal issue aside, it's what is fair. What is inherently unfair is to have one company that's following the rules
Yeah.
and reporting and having to pay the associated fees, and their competitor is not doing that.
Exactly.
They're not meeting the intent of the charter that was enacted by the voting public, and they're having an unfair competitive advantage over their
Yeah.
competitor. So I get that, you know, it's our challenge, you know, the legal piece aside, I'll say my challenge, you know, as the department administrator, is trying to look at it and balance the two pieces here, making sure we're meeting the threshold requirements of the charter, because that's our legal obligation, and also having a program that can be administered reasonably, equitably, fairly, trying to have it so that it's easy to report for industry, but then also trying to meet the concerns raised by council about the FTE percentage increasing and the cost increasing. I think we fixed part of the cost per FTE piece because of Joe's work. So it is somewhat of a chicken and egg discussion. And that's creating a challenge. I mean, just laying it out there, that's creating a challenge as well. I don't know, is there a better way to say that?
No, absolutely not. And I think part of the piece, what I would look to if we were doing something beyond is, even if it's not required, do we have the authority? And what we're talking about here is, yeah, absolutely we have the authority.
Anything that makes it fairer, more efficient, you know.
Well, and it's specifically going out and trying to add new folks to the program. I mean, when you have, here you have a mandate that if there's credible evidence that the fire marshal's office investigate, that's a mandate, it's a shall. And you have the toxics board requiring the fire, to report to the fire marshals the names. Well, that would certainly give the inherent authority of staff to go out and help the toxics board come up with those names. So is there a mandate that staff go out and do that for the toxics board? No. Is the inherent authority there? Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. So if I was in front of a court defending that and saying, well, we have the authority, it's certainly not prohibited. And that's a separate question, is it mandate?
Where does the proposed reduction of staff time, how is that developed? the numbers involved.
That's something that, you know, Joe and I will, and Al, the fire marshal, will need to sit down and discuss. And, you know, we definitely want the most bang for the buck. But we need to, I guess we need to do, that. She's already done a pretty good analysis of what she does and
Yeah.
weighted that by time allocation. And we need to go through that piece, and I would say, I think that is a place where the board can help with that piece. I mean, we're not trying to strip the board of its power and authority. At the same time, you know, we've got a direction that at least we need to head in and try to balance things out.
Well, there is the detailed accounting. On the other hand, it also seems so detailed as I'm not sure about the exact accuracy because just, you know, there's only so much.
Understood.
And so I'm just kind of, are we just at the beginning throwing out a number, oh, we should be at 0.5, or did we look at things and sort of, well, this piece here, this, and it tallies at this range, you know, or is that work all ahead?
I wouldn't say that work is ahead. It hasn't been quite that scientific. You know, the energy has been to return to the same FTE allocation that the program had in the past, where it began. You know, in some ways, we have tools available to us today that we didn't have back when the program started, which should make that easier. In other ways, just life has become more complicated, which adds a certain amount of time factor as well. So I'm not sitting here, and I don't think Joe is ready for this discussion, or Al, of, well, this is exactly the plan and how we're going to do this.
So the reference point is, say, going back to 5 or 10 years ago.
Yes. And the other thing I would say is, you know, if we get, wherever we land, wherever that is, if it's not working and we see that after a year or two or, you know, a couple cycles, I mean, obviously we're gonna have to come back and play with the model again. I don't think we're doing just service for the charter and what our responsibility is if all of a sudden we start creating an inequity between businesses.
So I apologize for any naive question, but, so if, it seems that we're a little bit different than the other committees. So I was wondering, in this situation, if you do cut the FTE down too low, and then we are not compliant with the charter, it seems like we are left open to litigation, is that true? I mean,
We will
at
never
some
not
point-
comply. with the
okay,
charter.
so then, but I don't understand how you make that decision about where that FTE gets cut to, so that we're still compliant. I guess that would be my question, like, how do you make that assessment?
We have, I mean, part of it is, I mean, we know what is minimally required under the charter. We have an understanding based on the information that Joe's provided, how much time that takes.
From that form that she.
And earnestly, and I don't, the flexibility of it, I mean, if there is a hint, we're not gonna cut it down so close that we're only doing the minimum,
Right.
and if we drop it, I mean, it's just, we're not, first of all, and part of it is just, this program has largely functioned well above the minimums for a long time. It's not gonna, I don't think there's any expectation to take it down to the minimums, so we won't get there. We're not slicing the hair.
I was just wondering about the comment about, well, if we go a year and then it doesn't seem to be working, so I was sort of wondering what that meant, like.
In my mind, where that was all of a sudden our participation rate starts really shrinking and starts driving the FTE cost up. Joe says, I'm exceeding my allocation. I don't have time to go out and make sure we have compliance. That's where we start having a system failure, but we would still be within compliance
Okay.
of the charter. That's just
And
an
then
example.
My other sense, and I don't need to put anything out there, but, you know, Joe seems to be an extremely efficient person, as I think some other people have said,
Mhm.
and I would worry about at some point losing her, and so I wonder if you're making these decisions based on Joe in this position, that maybe that a replacement or something is not going to be anywhere close to that. So that's why I just
Sure.
think a little bit about that idea of, you know, at some point you have to retain what you have.
I'm a true believer in you give what you pay for, and you pay for what you get,
Sounds like it.
simply stated.
Some years ago, they put in a federal law, you know, a paperwork reduction or something. You still see stuff that says, this form is gonna take you so many minutes to fill out, you know, and it's for the federal government to be aware of what burden they were imposing on people. Is there anything in state or local law that requires that kind of analysis, or does that law, you know, so what does it cost to report or to fill out a particular form or any, because that would be helpful to evaluate reductions of work that, you know, the staff does to see if they improve, you know, make it easier or harder for the reporting people, like the drop-down menu. You know. So is there any?
I'm not aware of anything that would require us to
Do
be
what?
tracking what, I mean, no.
I mean,
Because-
it's not a general public thing, you know, kinda, I think they do that with your taxes, or something, they put out an estimate.
Mhm.
So, but you're not aware of anything in,
Not that we're.
is there a name for that field of evaluation?
There might be. I don't know.
Efficiency.
Efficiency in that, yeah, okay.
And Randy, I just want to remind you, probably not to the level that you're talking about, but the Toxics Board as a whole is doing that in their gap analysis report that we're hopefully going to finish up next week. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and one of the questions that will be answered by the industry members is varying levels, meaning all the different sizes of businesses, about how much does it financially cost them to have to report under the Eugene Toxics Registration Program.
Okay, and so because there is no law that applies to us the way federal agencies would have to.
To track how long it takes somebody.
For people to report, yeah. So that's why we'll be doing it.
Not part of the chart. Well, the Toxics Board decided as a whole that that would be part of the report.
I'm trying to get down to what's the bottom line here. So the Toxics Board had consensus on a recommendation for the FTE and the necessary tasks to carry out the intent and the mandate of the charter. And that was sent forward. And then is the communication we're getting back right now is that that was not acceptable and that choices will be made that don't take into account the recommendations of this board, which is mandated to make those recommendations, shall. Is that what you're saying? That
I'm not saying any of that. I mean,
Let me take that one.
This is
The
it.
recommendation of the board was taken into account for the budget that we're living with now. This is in preparation for the next
For the- right.
budget cycle, which, you know, it's all the preparation happens before the budget starts. It gets adopted by council, and then we move forward. So we've been trying to get ahead of that. Last couple of cycles, we've been right down and then over the wire. So we're trying to be a little more proactive up front, but we're still feeling our way through this as well. But, you know, again, I said there's two areas in the beginning that have been identified for reduction. One is the cost per FTE in industry, which Joe was able to accomplish by bringing people that should be in the program into the program. But the other was looking at the allocation of FTE. So, I mean, it keeps coming back to that as well. And, you know, the target was given of a half FTE, bringing in line with where the program began.
And so part of it is that discussion with council when you take back, it's every year, council has to be the one that adopts the per FTE. And so the discussion right now of what should that FTE, where should that land, is all, as Chief Gross said, going into that discussion. And we have been behind in that for the last couple of years. We want to be far more proactive and have the ability to come up with that estimated fee. So part of it is that full circle with that conversation with council a few years ago where they were saying, why does the FTE for this position keep going up? So, in having the next per FTE discussion with them, the discussion is, look, it's gone down. Here are the efficiencies we were able to capture. So that's what drives this. It's not a rejection, I think the way you put it is, we made this proposal and the answer is no. It's a, look, here's where the discussion's coming from. We're trying to reduce the FTE as part of the per FTE calculation that's going into this, to reduce that cost based on council's previous comments of, we don't want to see fees continuing to go up and the FTE for this position is continuing to go up.
And phrasing it like that is really helpful, and I thank you for that, because as a board member, I feel it's my obligation to say it doesn't feel as disempowering to what we're mandated to do, to say the goal is to get to 50%. That's really not the question. The goal is what's the most efficient and effective way to implement the intent of this charter amendment, the Toxic Right to Know program. That's the question that I think elected officials should be asking, we should be asking, attorneys, fire chief should be asking, which is the smarter question, is doing the job right rather than what can we do to meet some predetermined staffing FTE.
And I think that's part of the messaging, and I don't want to overstep because this is policy, I'm aware, but I'll say it because I was at that meeting and I heard what council was saying. If the answer is, look, we looked at all the efficiencies, and to have this program work the way everybody knows and loves it to be working, and what is embodied in the intent, what we came to was really 0.7 FTE for this position is best for the companies, it's best for fairness, it's best for the folks looking for the information. And now you have something specific to discuss with council when you take that per FTE fee there. We looked at the efficiencies of the program, we looked at the way to make this easier for businesses, and here's where we landed. It's not at the high 0.9 that we were a couple of years ago. It's not at the low 0.5, because here's why we feel it can't. Here's where we landed. Maybe that's the discussion, or maybe it is at 0.5 and that's where we land, or maybe, but part of this is to be able to not just come back to council with another number that ignores the very specific discussion they had about why does this FTE keep going up, and the fees, we're going up right along with it. So it's to be able to have an informed discussion about why the number is what it is, when we again, not that comes around quickly, not terribly far off, go back to council and say, here's the per FTE fee for this program.
Does the council understand the implications of the $2,000 cap?
We've explained it to them, yeah, a lot. It has a very, very difficult effect.
It's been explained, but keep in mind, this is one of a million issues that they're dealing with, and from one year to the next, some of them may retain it, some may not. I mean, they get a stack like this of reading material every week. I don't know how they get through it, to be honest.
Well, aren't most of the businesses paying the $2,000 cap?
Yeah, I would say more than 50%.
And
I don't know that you guys have made this discussion yet.
And back in 2004, 2005, and now, gosh, I'm getting old. So that's almost 10, that's 10 years ago now, but we had a very robust discussion with the council because it troubled many on the board what appeared to be this fee inequity, as they were calling it, where you have these large businesses capped out and you have these smaller businesses really shouldering the bill. And so we had a very robust discussion about what are the ways to address this fee inequity. Threw out a bunch of options, all of which were fairly unpalatable. And so the way it was left was, well, it's not perfect, but it's what we've got. based on some of the court decisions. And so, and now, you know, many folks on the council now were a part of those discussions, but it was, that $2,000 cap was, it was analyzed to try to address it, because I get it. It's the toughest part of this whole thing in my opinion.
Well, and it seems like at some point, since most of our costs are personnel, that's gonna keep increasing. At some point, I don't know, 20, 30 years down the line, none of us will be here, hopefully, at least on the board. We're gonna run into an issue where we can't get any more money for our budget and our costs are increasing.
And there's always the,
This isn't the only place that has that problem.
yeah. And there's always, you know, the potential, I mean, and that was one of the options presented to council, was to try to take it under the legislature. Because that, that's where the $2,000 cap is actually legislative.
Well, I mean, even if you want to get into that arena, it even goes beyond that. You know, one of the complaints I commonly hear from industry is, well, we have all these different things that we report to, and none of them are the same. None of them line up. And I'm sure that's very frustrating for industry. It would be nice if there was a way that things could mesh a little bit better, so that one report could be distributed to all the places it has to go. And, you know, I don't think the goal is to be onerous on industry, but sometimes it ends up that way. At the same time, you know, we have a very specific criteria, as you are well aware, that has to be met within the charter. So, you know, how can we get the information that the charter mandates we have available for the public, and how can we facilitate that whole piece of industry having ease of reporting, which gets back to the chicken and egg discussion where we were just a little bit ago. And I don't know that I have the answer for that.
There's no way to have an answer, because it's really not our problem. You have federal reporting, you have a
Yes.
state reporting, you have county reporting. It's not our problem, and it's not the fault of the charter. So I wish that discussion would just simply end, because this toxic board cannot solve that problem, and your department cannot solve it.
No, but we have that discussion frequently.
I don't understand why it can't.
Well, part of it's just what needs to be measured by the Eugene Toxics program as compared to everybody else. Eugene's Toxics program, we're measuring, you know, how the chemical is used, where the others kind of hit on the two ends. We're measuring more in the middle, you know, where it goes.
Modify it so it does.
Well, El Rapid tracks stack emissions,
Oh, that's a dandy.
but it's not our job to mandate what El Rapid tracks, and it's not our job really to discuss it here. We can't change it.
And we can't change the charter, only the vote of the people can change the charter. So that is why part of some of the court decisions about what the charter can't require, and you have the severability clause in the charter, which is why we work with it the way we work with it, which is why you can't read the charter cold and know exactly what to do, because you have some court decisions out there. But can anybody here, or the council can't tinker with the charter. That is by the people only.
About the, you're saying the fees and large companies, small companies. In the fire response, does this program happen to provide any spin-off benefits for your emergency response? I mean, I feel like as a citizen it does, because it's accessible. But your main tool for fire response for small companies, big companies, the fire marshal's report, right?
The program itself doesn't aid us in our response. No, we have other systems that we can get into. We have pretty detailed information in our pre-emergency plans. You know, in some cases we know exactly where the product is, and then we are one of the 13 state regional teams is here.
So there isn't really anything in the reports that the toxics program provides. You get those reports from elsewhere.
Yes, sir.
Whereas like if I were in a neighborhood association, because it would be so easy to get, this is valuable to me.
This would be the best place to go. that I'm aware of,
Yeah.
for a neighborhood association.
Yeah, if there's, you know, in case of the giant fire, before, you know, the fire department is a disaster or something.
We have a lot of sources of intelligence, especially post 9/11, that we get information almost more than we can digest.
And I just thought of that because of the, you have different costs to develop plans for large companies, small companies, and, but you're saying that this program doesn't really factor into that.
No.
One last question, and I don't know if there's any value in this, but is there any comparison with our staffing FTE versus other boards and commissions?
They're also different,
Yeah.
is part of the issue. Most of them, the staffing is in whole FTEs, where we are a partial
Mhm.
FTE. It really, we're kind of our own animal.
Right. But you're saying that most of them have a full FTE, most of the boards and commissions?
That I'm aware of, and there's a lot of smaller ones that may have partial FTEs. It's not a place I've spent a lot of my
Right,
time.
no, I'm just wondering, since we're charter mandated, how that happens.
Sure.
Why is that more efficient?
And a lot of, I mean, my experience, like I think of the planning commission, like they have a staff person, but it's also a full-time planner. Like they
Right.
don't have it's a full FTE, but it's not a full FTE dedicated to.
Yeah, no, I was.
I was thinking police commission, I believe.
Right, I
That's
mean,
I believe that's a full-time.
she does.
But
a
what
bunch of
about
other
human
stuff.
rights,
Does she?
human rights commission, that kind of thing, what do they,
Well-
sustainability commission, how are they?
So,
staffed?
like the Sustainability Commission, Babe Sullivan
Mhm.
is and she staffs that, she's a full FTE, but she's not a full FTE as I understand it, but I could be wrong. She does a bunch of other stuff besides just staff the commission, so they are 1 FTEs, but they have many different things on their plate, not just staffing the
Well,
commission.
but her work, though, in that case, it's all around sustainability.
It is all around sustainability,
Just as
absolutely.
Joe's, the portion that's funded isn't just sitting here in these meetings, obviously. She's doing a lot of other work as well, so I think the same would be true of that, where Baby is a full FTE, Joe's position right now, 0.85.
Yeah, and for example, the planning commission, it may be one staff assigned, but that staff member's pulling in many staff, and there are often many staff attending meetings. not
Absolutely.
3 or 4 on payroll, attending meetings.
Right, and that's why like the staffing the commission, like Chief Gross said, it is very unique to the different ones. And so, right, like for the planning, sometimes you have 4 FTE, absolutely. So it's a difficult comparison. I think that part of this is, and what I want to make sure, and why I think it's important for us all to sit and talk is, when you see a memo from me like this that outlines what the minimum requirements are, there's a very specific kind of emotional response when we see something like that versus what we all together are wanting to make sure we accomplish, maintain the goals. It's not we don't want you to feel disempowered. It's a discussion. We want to answer the legal questions, absolutely, of what we think the minimum is. That's just one very small piece in this overall discussion. And I think that's why it's important to have discussions like this, so you're not left feeling like, oh gee, thanks, that was crummy. So these discussions are helpful and useful to just getting an understanding of what the minimum is, but what we also are generally. Everybody's kind of in this together, wanting to make sure what's accomplished is the same.
These discussions have felt, I'll speak for myself, they felt awkward from my position as well. I mean, I think we're trying to get our arms wrapped around something that's somewhat nebulous out there. And it's just kind of a general direction that we have. As we do move forward and the next budget is prepared for council, I mean, there is public testimony that's entered into the record as well, and there's nothing that I'm trying to do to put myself between you and the council.
What, I just would like to maybe take a stab at summing up my feelings. In all the other civic volunteering I've done for city or county, it seems like as a volunteer, I am encouraged to do my best to implement the intent of whatever entity I'm serving and not to mince it down, try to get at the lowest common denominator. And I totally appreciate what you just said about, the memo might seem cold and defining the minimum required, but that's really not the standard we're setting for ourselves as I see it. And that would go against what volunteers are told in every other civic participation moment that they might take on, is do your best, implement the intent, search, gather information, communicate that information. And difficult to do that if one is feeling like truly the backstory is diminish, reduce, take shortcuts, and not do its best for the people of the city.
And I think for what adjectives I would prefer to use besides diminish and reduce would be efficiencies. Where can we have Joe's time be more sufficient? Because really this is about staff time. The time that the board spends doesn't always have to correlate to jacking up the staff time correspondingly. And so that's where we want to try to see if where are those areas? Are there ways where staff time actually can be made more efficient, even though maybe there's more robust action happening at the board level? So the participation and the value of you all as board members and looking for efficiencies in how we use staff is not one and the same, because this absolutely value staff, the volunteer time, the efforts, all of that. We want to make this program the best it can be. Are there ways we can do that while keeping staff time not at 0.9 and keeping the per FTE costs lower and all that? If there are ways, we need to find them. We need to do that.
My experience as a board member for the past, I've been here 3 years since my board. I started 3 or 4 just after you started. So I don't have an experience with the previous person who was in Joe's position, but it seems like there was a lot of catch up and cleanup and modernization that needed to happen, and that is why we increased the FTE. Maybe now we can cut back some. I think we're a little bit hesitant to go back to 0.5 because I don't think, based on what I've seen, it didn't seem like the job was getting done at 0.5, and I don't know. Maybe Joe, after she had all this experience, might be able to take it back to 0.5. I don't know. But a new person coming in who's not the Wonder Woman that Joe is, I don't know if they can do it.
So in terms of next steps, I have a question, I guess, for the chief and the Toxics Board, because as all of you saw, we have preliminary budget numbers, which I sent to you a couple of weeks ago, I think it was. How did, and it's also for Al, how do both of you want to get involved in those early discussions before the Toxics Board starts making their recommendation? Did you want to attend our initial meetings to help weigh in on the staff tasks matrix? Or did you want the board to come up with a preliminary recommendation and then I meet with the two of you and then come back to the board with the feedback?
I think my preference would be, you know what we're trying to accomplish, and take that coupled with the discussion we've had here today and come up with your best laid plan that will hopefully take into account the need for efficiency and keeping, but at the same time, keeping businesses in the program. And if there's ways to streamline the work that is done so that it is more efficient. And then maybe we come in at that point and have a discussion.
So the toxics board review the information first, come up with a preliminary recommendation, and have you attend maybe the beginning of the next meeting.
Right, I think that something like that would make sense to me. You know, again, I'm not trying to tell you what to do. At the same time, I am trying to establish some parameters for targets that we should try to get in.
Anything else to add, Al?
No, I'm in agreement with that. I think this whole discussion has been about finding the sweet spot, you know, in the FTE allocation. And you guys have the policy side to wrestle with. The budget side is gonna be the other side of it, and there's a good spot in there, and it has everything to do with the personality involved. And you're right, if we change that person, it may have to swing one way or the other. But for this discussion, that's what you're looking for, a sweet spot.
And for what it's worth, you know, having been involved with a number of issues and initiatives over the years, this is part of the process. I mean, there's kind of a push and pull, and, you know, hopefully we end up where we should end up. Any more questions of us?
All right.
Thank you very much. And again, I felt like you were kind of in a bad spot because her job was to take the minimalist approach. I mean, that's to know what we have to do and work up from there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
If everybody can stick around for just 2 more seconds so we can schedule the next meeting. And I know Lisa was supposed to leave 20 minutes ago. Thank you, Chief and Catherine.
Thank you.
So the primary topic will be budget review. Sorry, I'm cutting your shot. For either November or December meeting. And for advocacy members only, we have a meeting scheduled for next Thursday at 3:30 p.m. to finish up our section of the gap analysis report. Because industry members are almost done except for Rick's financial information. That also
I've
be
sent
another
you all
reminder
the information I'm gonna send you.
that you were vacationing in the Ski Mountains. That
I'm
was
pretty
your
good.
thought.
I think I'm pretty good with the next couple months.
You were gonna get me specific costs for Andy on
Just this,
the Eugene Toxic Right to Know reporting. I'll send you another reminder.
you don't have to send me a reminder.
Okay. So does
Just this, not LRAP or any of the
Correct.
rest of it. Because it's, whether anybody says, it is all interrelated. Some of the information falls here, more here, and so on.
And
Those of you who have business would understand that.
and it's an approximate number.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be
I could
exact.
probably give you that now.
Okay. So anybody have any dates? I'm gonna be gone the second week in November. So the week of the 10th, I'm not here.
Probably not that week of Thanksgiving.
That's okay.
So this is the week of the 17th.
Yeah. Is our Thursday's good for people?
Thursday's good for me.
So that would be the 20th. November?
Don't know yet.
Randy?
I've got a place in Louisiana that I go to periodically. I don't know what they have the plane schedule. 20th November?
20th November, 3:30 PM,
Okay. What day is it? Thursday or Wednesday?
Thursday.
Okay.
Great. So that's all I have for today.
Okay. And a real piece of heaven.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Appreciate you all coming.
Are we adjourned?
We adjourn the meeting?
Yes.
Make a motion?
Yes.
Oh, no motion.
No, we're adjourned.
Meeting adjourned.
Meeting adjourned.